My name is Andrew, and I gave a talk at the last lightning talk about ocean sampling, and specifically about studies that have been done recently regarding the concentration of persistent organic pollutants bound into plastics in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. So scientists are looking at those plastics and finding that the plastics are binding with oily pollutants such as DDT and such. And at the last lightning talk, I presented some findings from a paper, and the link to that paper is on the wiki for the lightning talk, so if you're interested in it. Actually, I'm going to continue by showing another picture from that same paper, because this talk I wanted to specifically talk about robotics and perhaps its role in ocean sampling. I didn't make it in the last 5 minutes, so I thought I would finish this time. The paper illustrates a kind of a swath of the ocean where the scientists were able to take their boat and take the samples and do their analyses. And the reason I wanted to mention this or show it to you is because it's basically a very narrow swath of the ocean, and there's a lot of the ocean that they haven't been able to access, and they require funding and kind of a boat that can take them there, and also a boat that's capable of carrying a lot of food and such. And the boats typically can only be out in the ocean for 3 weeks or so. So, you know, is it possible that we could build robotic samplers that could help us populate this map more densely to help scientists evaluate and model the concentrations of plastics? So there's another diagram here. I'll just show it very, very briefly. This is kind of another one showing the sampling locations, and you can see the yellow one here shows kind of the loop that the ship took. They stopped in Hawaii and then came back, and again, it's fairly sparse. So kind of one of my interests is just seeing if it's possible to build something that we could just drop in the ocean and have it do the sampling for us. So I wanted to show this picture. This is a picture of how they typically do the sampling right now. They drag a net behind the boat, and it's called a manta trawl because it's got these wings on it with a mouth, and they drag it behind, and the netting there is about 300 microns, or 1/3 of a millimeter. So again, they do that from the back of their boats, and it's a time-consuming process. So for the last several years, probably 3 years or so, I've been kind of working on building a kind of a simple robotic system to take water in, to put that water in transparent tubing and use a high-power light source and a camera to look at the water as it goes through, looking for particulates, plastics particularly. And it's a fairly simple concept. It's got an LED light source and a peristaltic pump with a battery and a power control board based on an Arduino, and a computer running ROS, which you'll hear about in another talk today, which is be very interesting. So that's the concept of the samplers that I've been working on. And if you're curious about them, I have one version here that's fairly large. And it's basically that square inside. It has a laptop in it, and it's pretty heavy, so I won't hold it for too long. But you can see on the side it's got little inputs there for water to come in and water to come out, and you charge up the battery and you throw it in the ocean, and as long as the battery lasts, it will pump the water through and take high-resolution images of the water. And then, so earlier this year, I didn't talk about this in the last lightning talk, but I've been working on a new version, which is much smaller, and it's an order of magnitude cheaper, and it requires about 1/5 of the power. And this version uses a BeagleBone, which is an open source Linux computer, and most of the parts I printed on my 3D printer. So that, you know, if you want, you can look at the two and you can see one of them done without a 3D printer and one of them done with a 3D printer, and it makes it so you can do things in 3 dimensions, as opposed to, well, you would see everything is laid out in a 2-dimensional kind of plastic polycarbonate frame on the inside of the suitcase. So doing it in 3D can make it smaller, and it's definitely cheaper, and it was faster to do. And with that, I'm done. Thank you very much. I think we can...
But so it's not, you have to, it doesn't have a motor, it doesn't go to Hawaii and back by itself. You gotta go in the boat and dip it down there and then take the water out.
Yes, this one you would throw it in the ocean yourself. And so this version would require you to put it in the ocean. And the idea is that you could drop it in there for a month or so.
Okay, so what if so instead of doing the analysis in real time, why not create a robot that takes 100 samples and stores them in the device itself, and then analyze it when it comes home? So it takes a little vial of water from 100 different spots in the ocean, and doesn't have a computer on board. It just goes out and gets the samples and then comes back.
That would be a good option. This one does save the images on flash. And, but yes, I don't know if is it okay to have questions? Or, I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards if you have more questions. It does save it on the flash drive.
I have a quick question. How much space do you think this would cover if you were to drop it in a month?
That's a good question. It is, to give you a perspective on how much water this system will pump, it takes about a minute to pump about 1.5 tablespoons. So this thing on for about a minute will pump a tablespoon of water through it. And the reason is that it's looking at it at a very high kind of magnification, and the pump is designed, it's kind of a very small medical pump to do that. So I think I calculated if you wanted to pull the entire Pacific Ocean through it, I think it would take something like the age of the universe or some ridiculous number of years. But if you put it in the water and let it sit for a day, charging its battery, take one sample a day as it floats around, you can get a sample from kind of different parts of the ocean. I think it could last for, I think things typically can last for about 3 months in the ocean before they start getting encrusted with biofouling materials and such. So
that's the case in the ocean. What's the probability that the Coast Guard picks it up?
I think the smaller you can make it, the lower that probability. That's why this one is smaller. This one is designed to fit in an AUV, actually. In the payload bay of one of the gliders, so you could. Yeah, that was the idea. This one has its own battery and stuff in it. This one doesn't have a battery. It's designed to be put inside of a robot. So this is an instrument. It's not it's meant for a robot to carry it around. Thank you.
Hi, David Whitus, and it's on my first patent, actually, and ended up being a program I wrote, some code behind it, and a system that was merged into a company that sold for okay, but kind of my first startup business foray that really probably didn't work out that well, because I think it really would have been worth a lot of money, and I did okay. I met my wife through it, so my son Jake here is here because of this patent in some views. But collaborative filtering and a really simple version of it. So the software and the technologies that allow Apple's Genius software to say, I haven't even really used it, but I understand, because you're playing these songs on your iPhone, we recommend you probably might also like this, or certainly, Pandora, how they choose what to play for you. He says actually that he's using only a different method, but I think there's probably some in there, traditional collaborative filtering about the recommendation system of saying, okay, if you like these songs, then you probably like that one also, and it's all over the place. Amazon will recommend to you, grocery stores, it's everywhere now. At the core, it's a really pretty simple technology, and the quick overview of it is, if I ask you the name of your 5 favorite albums, recordings, the fact that your A and B item show up together on your list means that there's a possibility those two are similar in the sense that people that like A tend to like B. And you just keep track of that with a little bit of math, the simplest little thing. Then once you've asked 1,000 or 10,000 or whatever people what their 5 favorite or whatever is, you go to process the next person, you take the first entry on their list, you see whatever else it's been linked to, and you build a table. Then you go to item 2 on their list, do the same thing, drop it into the results table, all 5 say, then find anything that's duplicated, and of course, A might be linked to Z, 100 times, and B is linked to, Q to 1,000 times. So each thing that you put into your results table has a certain weight that is how strong the link is between those two. And as you build this big results table from all 5 of theirs, then some of these, results could be a 100 weight link here plus 1,000 here. So now you got 1,100 pointing to that particular recommendation. Then the last step is just to you adjust for the dark side of the moon effect, as I called it. Just that without this tiny bit of math that tended to come to the top of way too many lists. Way too many people's lists all the time, and so you just say, take a look at a number. How many times has this particular recommended item been linked to in general? So if it's a minor little indie recording, it's not been linked to that much. If it's Dark Side of the Moon, it's been linked to thousands, and you just handicap things. If it looks like Dark Side of the Moon really ought to be recommended to this user, make it have to have a really high linkage. Whereas if it just it's showing up like it always wants to show up, don't even mention it to them, because that's the way it works. So the patent, it's easy to find. My last name at the top there, whitus.com, is a lousy website, but it's got this and that around. And one of the things that you can get to, or just put in Whitus and patent in Google, and this is like the first hit. If you've never done a patent, it's not a bad one to study for. I mean, yeah, it's an internet, it's a software patent, which the patent office doesn't like to issue them that much anymore, but it's just a nice, it's like studying the paperclip patent, if you've never seen, don't get intimidated, it's not bad. If you have that idea that, really ought to be patented, go for it, because it's been pretty good to me. I've had some fun with the stuff over the years. Real quickly in the last minute, it's a silly little flow chart at the top, but I'll show you the table on the bottom that is involved. Input items, I did movies for the patent. So Star Wars, The Terminator, and 12 O'Clock Highs, the guy's 3 favorites. And then just a names table says, okay, look up what else goes with Star Trek or Star Wars, just a little more information, not important. Your links table is the main thing. Airplane on the top has been linked to When Harry Met Sally 12 times. 12 people have had it together on their list. And on down that list, your links to table is where you do the Dark Side of the Moon stuff. Identify how popular that is so it doesn't get recommended too many times. And then that flow chart at the top tells you what I just said pretty much, the simple way to write such a system. And I've got some sample code and that I wrote at the time, but I don't get to work on it anymore or own it because we sold it for not enough. That's it.
I have questions.
Yeah.
I have lots of questions. I'll try to look at them. So, how did you get the data in the first place?
Ah, that was cool. It was weird because the internet's just coming out.
So what year did you? This is for Apple.
I had the idea in '81. I think my first notes are. In '90, and as I tried to learn to program over the years, this is what I was always trying to write. In about '95 is when I had an OK working version in Clipper. It was compiled DBase. Anybody old enough? And you found me with one of the earliest laptops walking around a shopping center telling people, excuse me, you got a minute? I said, what's your 5 favorite music recordings, of which people can never tell you that under stress. I didn't get far. It wasn't until the internet came out and I put it up. And then you just had a few results. It didn't work very well. It doesn't work, you're right, until it's been used for a while.
Yeah, you need a lot of big sample to get it working.
Not too big, just enough that people will play with it. And that's a whole other story about me spamming news groups with these questions saying, here's a survey, what's your 5 favorite musics? And then gathering from it and irritating a lot of people when I did that.
So you wrote it, you sold to Apple? Or you sold
Microsoft owns the
Microsoft owns it, yeah. And you wrote it, how did you write it originally?
A mixture, mostly Clipper is compiled DBase, kind of a basic. Yeah, database programming. A little bit of Unix scripting and HTML.
My dad was a doctor, so I've heard of DBase.
All right. Hi, my name is Sean, and I'm a hobo. And it's actually surprisingly hard to admit in some situations because of the rampant homophobia in this country. However, what this actually means is I live in a van and work wherever I can find work, which, as a software consultant, it's not too bad. So I'm here to talk about the dwelling hack involved in that, and working out things like where do you shower, where do you get mail, and that sort of thing. There are some pretty simple answers, and I expect most of the time will be people asking questions. So please ask questions. So the simple answer is I have a 24-hour gym. So I have Lifetime Fitness in the area. It's a fairly luxurious gym, which I'm not sure I would buy if I were just working out there. But as a bathroom, no one else has a water slide in their bathroom. Let's see. PO boxes are pretty easy to get, although it does help if you have a real address for things like cell phones and well, the PO box itself actually. But there are any number of friends, family, relatives that are willing to let you say you live there if you don't actually live there. So that works pretty well. Let's see, what else is there? What's that?
UPS stores.
Yeah, UPS stores. Actually, there's something I've been thinking of trying, although I have to check with an accountant if this is actually legal or not, is that there are a number of mail forwarding services in various places. They're designed for RVers. And you can say, my residence is in Texas, where there is no income tax, or at least state tax. And then you don't have to, then theoretically, although like I said, I have to talk to an accountant before I try this, you don't pay state taxes. You don't have a lot of the drawbacks of the commute here. I have the best commute in the world most days. I get up, walk out of the parking lot, and go to work. Let's see, I kind of started this in April of 2010, and basically I was stuck paying for a 3-bedroom house that only I was living in for most of the time, and that really sucked. And so I decided I just was done with it for a while, put all my stuff into storage, and slept in the van. And it's been surprisingly comfortable. I haven't really done anything else since then, and right now I'm kind of contemplating whether summer is whether to stop next summer or find something, because winter is fine. You can always I have a really good sleeping bag, keeps me warm. It's pretty comfortable. Summer, you can't keep the air conditioning running all the time, even with the giant set of solar panels I have. Oh yeah, systems. I've got a solar system that runs power, about 1,000 watts inverter. This is mostly enough for laptop, and I went to Burning Man a couple of years ago, and that ran a freezer full of beer for 2 weeks in the desert. So that worked pretty well. Got a couple of car batteries, although I found out later the way to do it was not to buy 12-volt car batteries and set them up in parallel. The way to do it was to buy multiple 2-volt batteries and line them up in series, so that because they hold a lot more juice. Although at the time I wasn't really sourcing the things, so then you need 6 of them, and I only have room for 2. So. Questions? Yes.
You might not want to disclose this, but where are the top 5 places you can park and sleep in your van legally?
Legally, it's pretty easy. Anyone's house that lets you sleep there. Most places that allow 24-hour parking, they really can't say that much. The gym, I have a membership, therefore I'm allowed to park there. Let's see, what else do we have? Let's see, friends' houses, the gym, work usually is fine, although my current work has got a weird parking policy. Just different stuff, and you kind of move around. Mostly, no one bothers me. Partly because you don't make it directly obvious that there's someone in the van, and then it's not a problem. Car is parked there overnight, no one thinks twice. if there's, you know, if it's an actual car with someone asleep in it, someone will come and check it out sooner or later. So put up curtains. Yeah.
So is it a van or
It's a big
minivan?
conversion van. Yeah. It's a big conversion van.
Okay.
So it's like it's a Dodge Ram van 1500.
Do you think
not
that might be the smallest someone could live in, or do you think you could go smaller?
I've heard of people living in like station wagons and things. So yeah. On the other hand, this is about as little space as I have because I have a fair amount of stuff. It is also about as tall as I can go because there are a billion places here to park that have, you know, well under 6'8", which is how tall the van is. Even downtown, that is a problem. There are places otherwise. Any more questions before I wrap up?
Did you get the van specifically for this purpose, or something?
I originally planned to travel around the country and do this sort of thing and figure out a place to settle down, but things
So you
have
bought
worked
it like about the time you left your house?
out. About a year before.
So how does this, you said something about sort of how it's related to your job, you just could then go wherever, is that?
Yeah, I'm a consultant, so I move around a lot.
I see, so you've been for a lot of places there.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Right.
wherever is useful.
Do you work in your van sometimes?
Occasionally, although mostly it's more comfortable to go to a coffee shop or something and just use the Wi-Fi there.
Right.
So you, do you usually use local Wi-Fi, or do you get satellite by chance? Or
I don't get satellite. I use my cell phone. It's,
Cell phone?
you know, 3G, 4G is good enough for most things.
Do you have any good tips on how to save money on cell phone service?
Don't get anything that makes you pay for tethering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I was inspired by this book, Nature Aquarium World. It's part of a 3-book series by this famous Japanese designer of nature aquariums. Here's kind of an example that inspired me. Is, you know, there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of shading areas. There's color. There's places for the fish to hide. So I really wanted to tackle one of these, even though I had never had a fish tank of any kind. And this isn't necessarily something for beginners. But so here's a picture of the tank when I first started out. There's some kind of ground cover and moss is here. There's there's something here. There's some kind of sea grasses back here. These are kind of reddish. There's something else. There's about 7 kind of plants here just starting off. And you got a little ecosystem going here. You got your basic photosynthesis where you got your light and your CO2, and the plants, produce a little food from that, and oxygen is an output, and the fish take that in. The thing is, when you have this many plants, especially harder to grow ones like some of this ground cover, which you won't find in any local fish store, you need a lot of light and a lot of CO2. So that's where the technology comes in. These are called like high-tech aquariums. Right up here above the top is a lamp, which was more expensive than the aquarium. It's basically 2 96-watt bulbs enclosed in a housing with 2 cooling fans. It's on a timer, so there's a simulated nighttime. And it's meant to simulate sunlight. It's a warm light. Below, down here in the cabinet, there is actually a compressed CO2 canister with a regulator valve and a tube coming up, and right in that blue tube, that's where it bubbles CO2 in the tank. Also in the cabinet below, there's a filter which was rated for twice the volume. This is about a 65-gallon tank. It was rated for twice that volume. Does a lot of fancy filtering. It's got a foam layer which traps particulates. That's called the mechanical filtering. It's got a biological filtering, which is like where beneficial bacteria will take out things like ammonium and nitrate, things that are bad for fish and plants. It's got a chemical filtration level, which is, in my case, it was activated charcoal, which takes out things like heavy metals and chlorine and any odor or discoloration from the water. There's a heater in the tank, which is right here, which keeps the water at, this was about 80-degree tank. And you set that depending on your fish and your plants. And it'll flash, it automatically keeps it at a certain level, flash red for some reason. It can't keep it at that particular level. This one you can see, you'll see later where this grew, but here's a piece of wood, and with fishing wire, I tied on this moss just to kind of get it started. And here's some of these cardinal tetras that I had. I had one school of fish in there just to make it look like it was one school, just for the aesthetics of it. I really only plan on having one plant. I had a lot of chemical testing kits to test for things like ammonia, nitrate, and pH levels being out of balance, but with a good filtration system. Also, I changed half of the water each week, which sounds like a big deal, but actually turned out to be pretty simple. There's a hose going right into the kitchen sink, empty out half of the water. You dechlorinate the half that remains in the tank, and then there's a water going from the hose in the kitchen right in there. The whole process took half an hour at the most, once a week. So changing the water that often, having a good filtration system. I did a lot of chemical tests, but it turned out none of the levels of anything got out of control. Here's a picture of the whole tank with like a hood on top, so you don't really see the lamp. All you see is kind of the picture. These people, there's actually a yearly competition for these aquascapes, they call them, to see who has the best ones in the world. This stuff right here is how much that stuff that originally was on that log really would grow. Some of these, here's a close-up of some of these plants, and you can see I would originally wonder what some of these white streamers were coming off of here until I kind of posted on some of the bulletin boards. It turns out these are roots, and it's a sign of a really fertile environment when you get roots coming from basically the tops of the plants reaching out for ground. It shows you get really good, healthy. So I had it for about 10 months. It was fun setting it up, watching it grow. Every once in a while it would look like one of these magical tanks in the book, but it was more or less by accident. Sometimes when that moss would grow, it would go off little oxygen bubbles because the plants give off oxygen, come off in little tiny bubbles, and the light would shine on it. It would really look magical, but it was more or less by accident. And the only thing that was kind of a surprise and was that there was a lot of trouble controlling invasive species. I had a black kind of beard-like algae that started growing amongst the plants. It kind of ruined the look. All up in here you get this black fuzzy algae. I bought some Siamese algae eaters that would just dine on that. They were just happy as could be eating that nonstop. I had this white thread-like plant that would get all wound up in my beautiful moss, and I could never quite get rid of it. It would cover it, would get wound up and around the roots. And finally there was the snails, which once you get one or two introduced, basically from a plant that you brought in from a plant store, you order online, I mean, they multiply like crazy. Within weeks you just have hundreds of snails, and so you can never get rid of them. So bottom line, I really enjoyed it. I found it was pretty easy to get some healthy plant growth. I found out that you need to do a lot more than I anticipated, kind of controlling these invasive species. And here's a little video that actually Andrew shot of some of the, this is the moss. This is that moss that I originally tied on that plant. You can see how much it's grown. I just tied it on with fishing wire on a piece of wood. It's kind of blocky, but there's snails. You can see all that. I mean, there's hundreds of snails. That's not a very good video, actually. I don't know why it's so blocky. Anyway, that's it.
So you didn't have to give an infinite regress of larger and larger predators to take care of the snails.
Right. No. It was manual labor, I can tell you. It was all manual labor.
So this garden of Eden, the snails have eaten of the tree of like plankton and takes them down, throws them out.
Do you control the environment manually or automatically?
Well, as far as temperature, there's automatic temperature control. And as far as light, I'm controlling light.
You are toggling the lights?
Yes.
So I was at a hydroponics meeting for Nova Labs yesterday. Are you familiar with Nova Labs?
No.
It's a makerspace over in Reston. And they had a group that was looking at exactly this thing. I think they even brought the exact same book.
Yeah.
They're controlling the CO2 release and the timing of the lights and all the climate controls automatically.
Right. You can put. I had a timer, so that the light and the CO2 would come on at specific timelines and toggle off. Yeah.
But from what they said, they thought they were going to have a human groups that wanted to get involved in that. I don't know what the mobility situation is. It might be something.
Okay. I'll talk to you that afterwards.
So anyway, hi, I'm Katie, and I operate an interplanetary spacecraft. But nothing in this talk is proprietary information. I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer or NASA or anything like that. This is all public information, but I think it's interesting enough. I'd like to tell you about one of the tools I use in my job, specifically a service called the Deep Space Network. A lot of people have heard of the Deep Space Network, and a lot of people have the misconception that it's a bunch of satellites orbiting the Earth and relaying data between spacecraft and the Earth. That's actually not the case. The Deep Space Network is for spacecraft that are a certain distance away or have certain data needs. I should note that there is a different data network that does involve satellites orbiting the Earth, and that is how, for instance, the International Space Station communicates and objects in low Earth orbit, which is about 600 kilometers or so. That's how they communicate. But the Deep Space Network is all ground-based. It is in 3 locations around the Earth, approximately 120 degrees apart on the globe, strategically. So they're in Goldstone, California, Canberra, Australia, which is the only Southern Hemisphere station, and Madrid, Spain. So these 3 locations have a bunch of antennas, the largest of which are about 6 or 70 meters in diameter. Plus a bunch of other antennas are on the range of about 34 meters in diameter.
Holy shit, that's an enormous antenna.
It is enormous.
70 meters in diameter.
And that presents some interesting logistical challenges too. But we couldn't really have missions that go very far beyond the terrestrial planets if we didn't have ones as big as 70 meters. So we have these 3 stations so that beyond a certain point, which is what we're calling deep space. Deep space, by the way, has different meanings in different contexts. In some fields it means anything outside the solar system, but for the purposes of the Deep Space Network, this tool or this service, it means anything that is far enough away from the Earth that any of these 3 stations placed more or less equidistant around the Earth can see, at least one of those can see the object all the time. And that distance is about 30,000 kilometers. So the moon is considered deep space for this purpose. Any interplanetary missions, they all use the Deep Space Network that is run by NASA, and JPL operates it on behalf of NASA. What else was I going to mention? So these big antennas are these big satellite dishes, basically, big parabolic high-gain reflectors. And you can visit each of these 3 sites. I had the opportunity to visit the one in Goldstone, California. It's kind of in the middle of the desert to minimize radio frequency interference. But you can visit any of these 3 sites if you just kind of arrange a tour, and you can see them. They're enormous, of course. I mentioned the 70-meter ones gave some logistical challenges. They're so big that if snow accumulates in the dish, it can deform the shape of the dish, making the signal acquisition a little less than ideal. If there are high winds, they can buffet it and cause the pointing to be off a little bit, or or shaky so that you can't really point it very consistently. What else? Weather effects. The DSN, run by NASA, is not the only deep space network in the world. Other agencies, like the European Space Agency, have a network of dishes around the world. They're not as large dishes as NASA's Deep Space Network, so even if the European Space Agency put together an interplanetary mission, beyond a certain point in the solar system, they would need to use NASA's dishes instead of ESA's. Yeah, because they need, bigger dishes, or arrays of smaller dishes will also work. So, but the DSN, the one run by NASA, also has larger quantity as well as larger dishes. As a side note, I was looking into other deep space networks that exist. China has several dishes, but they're all in China. India, the Indian Space Agency has several, but they're all in India. But also the former Soviet Union has 3 of these 70-meter dishes. So I don't think they're doing much with them either. The Soviet space program kind of has gone downhill. But the things that, for my job, we do with these huge antennas are, receiving telemetry back from the spacecraft, which is, it comes back from the spacecraft to one of these 3 spots, California, Spain, or Australia. Then it gets sent to JPL, and then from there, JPL routes it to wherever your mission is based, whether it's here in Maryland or in Europe or South America or something like that. That's how the data flows.
What's JPL?
JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's associated with Caltech and with NASA, both of those. And I just wanted to say one more thing, even though my time is up, just to get an idea for people who are into RF. The kind of bands that we're communicating on are like X band, S band, KA band, and a little bit of K band. There are different kind of allocations depending on where in space you are and what you're doing with that. So my 5 minutes are already up, but any brief questions? Yes.
So do all the deep spacecraft, they all communicate at the same time, or do we separately?
They have to take turns, and that is the fun of scheduling time. So you have to negotiate with somewhat other missions, but just with the central planning people at NASA to decide when you get time. Because at any given time, for any given spot out there, a spacecraft is visible to at least one of these dishes. So if your spacecraft is in trouble, you can declare a spacecraft state of emergency, meaning you get priority. But most of the time, the way these things work out is that you just request time from whoever happens to have it allocated to them. And assuming you're the only mission who has an emergency right now, you'll almost certainly get it.
How many satellites are you communicating?
The DSN has, I think, upwards of a dozen right now, which is becoming a problem because it has all these commitments to fulfill from missions whose official lifetime ended years ago, decades ago, in the case of Voyager, which is still going. But of course, we don't want to stop communicating with Voyager. It's super exciting that it's at the edge of the solar system. So we love that data, but we're not building any more dishes. The future of the Deep Space Network is really going to be with arraying smaller dishes because of the logistical and expense and maintenance problems that you get into with building these giant 70-meter diameter dishes. Yeah?
What is the maximum range of the Deep Space Network? Do you not know yet?
We haven't reached it yet because Voyager is still going, it's still communicating. We don't have any spacecraft that has exceeded it. So.
But do you have any idea of how far it goes?
No, I don't. I don't know if there's a theoretical limit. It's a matter of what the power being the signal being transmitted from the spacecraft is.
Right. I mean,
so.
You said that the smaller dishes, if they're not in arrays, they can't go far enough. So I wondered if you, right? So I assumed that, or if you had a much further away mission, that you need even bigger dishes or even bigger arrays.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
they probably use things like phased arrays to figure out.
Yeah, yeah. So
Like the Keck space, the Keck Observatory and Hawaii are two separate. Their primary mirrors on their telescopes are each 17 meters across, and together they're equivalent to a mirror 84 meters across.
Yeah, being clever like that saves us a whole lot of money and lets us do things that would be otherwise impossible. Yeah, go ahead.
What's the fastest data rate that you're
It totally depends on the power levels, being transmitted in whichever direction it is. Just to give an example, once you get, like trans-Neptunian planets, a typical data rate for a spacecraft that I know a little bit about is like 10 bits per second during like a hibernation mode, a power saving mode basically. But higher data rates, maybe up to like 1,000 bits per second once you get to the edge of the solar system, and it really drops off at that point. But again, it depends how much power you're willing to use from your spacecraft.
And you're still discovering the propagation conditions as the craft leave the solar system, aren't you?
Yeah. There's a lot of radio science, that's being done that we don't know yet. So we're just at the edges of starting to do this whole space thing, at least interplanetary space thing. Okay, I've monopolized the time enough.
Hi everyone, my name is David Pietrocola, and I'm actually fairly new to the HacDC community, so thank you for welcoming me and allowing me to speak today. It's my second event coming to HacDC, and I'm excited to participate more in the community. I'm going to talk briefly about a project I've been working on dealing with rapid robot prototyping using commercial off-the-shelf components and the robot operating system, which is an open source software framework that's been developed by a company called Willow Garage and supported by thousands of researchers across the world. I also run a blog called Robots in DC that I've been doing for about the past year. And I've taken this project and converted it into tutorials that are now on the website, as well as another website I contribute to called RoboHub that came out of Europe. So when I first started creating this project, the goal was to learn about ROS using whatever I had, in my home. And in this case, it was an old Roomba, an old laptop, and a Microsoft Kinect. That's it. That's all you need to build a robot these days. Those components and open source software. So it's very inexpensive to build a robot these days. And the benefits of using this type of setup, as well as using ROS, include, first, cost. Second, you're not reinventing the wheel. So if you're using things like this, you're not dealing with motor control. You don't have to build, custom boards, sensor interfacing. If you want a user interface, say a GUI, or you want to communicate through a website, you can use libraries that already exist, and you can focus on what you want to do, whether it's telepresence, robotics, or human-robot interaction projects, things like that. You're not reinventing the wheel, so you can reuse a lot of code. And since robotics is a multidisciplinary discipline right now, it's a multidisciplinary field, you don't need to be an expert in path planning, in computer vision. You don't need to be an expert in all these different things in order to build a successful robot and achieve what you're trying to do. So I spoke about the hardware. Software side, I'm running the robot operating system, and I believe there was a tutorial on ROS recently, maybe a year ago. Yeah. So there's a lot of use of ROS being done in local universities. So you're using ROS in the ROS core system. So when you download ROS, you're using those packages. Then there's a API, a library for the Roomba. In my case, I had to rewrite an older existing Roomba library to work with the Roomba 400 series. So you have that package. You have a package that's already available for the Kinect. don't have to worry about interfacing with the Kinect. You get depth perception. You can do all sorts of image processing with it. You don't have to write any of it yourself. We have a middleware called ROSBridge, which lets you write a little bit of JavaScript, and you can communicate, whether it's with an iPad, a smartphone, or another computer, communicate through the web browser, to your robot without having to worry about all that middle communications details. And last, we have a JPEG server package, which takes care of all the streaming of the images that go through the Kinect to the web interface. And then you need a web server. In my case, I'm running a simple Python web server. It's on the command line. It takes a few minutes to fire up, so I'm happy to demo it after all the talks. And it's pretty simple, and I can walk you through it. And lastly, I wanted to note that I'm looking for collaborators. I've been looking at creating a robotics startup over the past year. I just came back from a conference in Pittsburgh on it's called the Robo Business Leadership Summit. So I've been researching robotics products and robotics businesses for about the past year, and I'm looking for co-founders. So if you have an interest in robotics, you want to have an impact on people's lives, getting robots into people's homes, please speak with me, either through email or later today. And if you want to blog about robotics or different robotics events occurring in the DC area, I'm happy to post on my blog. And really, the goal of this blog that I started about a year ago is to generate a robotics community. There's definitely one in Boston, there's one in Pittsburgh, there's one in Silicon Valley. I think DC, we can definitely get something going with all the technical talents and higher education that we have in this area. Okay? Any questions? Yeah.
So first thing I always want to ask is like, what kind of actuators do you implement quickest? It's like a computer is a robot, but it can't really do a whole lot of stuff in the physical world. It does everything on the screen and memory. But like for instance, one of the robots I really want to buy is like the vacuum cleaner robots. Yeah. So this is what this is?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you what yours did. And
this is a standard Roomba. You can go to Best Buy and buy it. I didn't change anything. The older models, I'm not sure if the newer model has it, but they all have this interface. It's a serial interface with a mini PIN connector, and there's a publish API. The good thing about ROS, you don't even have to study the API document. You just use the package that someone else already wrote, and you can just control it. As long as you learn ROS, you can just use patches that someone already has. There's also the iRobot Create, which is cheaper than a Roomba, and it's meant for hobbyists. It doesn't have a back end. I think that one I got on booth.com. It was refurbished for $150.
Does it work well on hardwood boards?
It's okay. Actually, if you want like a real robotic vacuum cleaner, get the Nito robot. It's a little more expensive, but it has a laser rangefinder, so it maps out your room. It doesn't do random drive in. It's actually supposed to be a much better vacuum cleaner.
So, does anyone else have a question? So, you can do that. It's not a very easy actuator. You have to buy the hardware prepackaged. Building your own vacuum system using a carpet or hardware tool is difficult. So the software is one thing. But how do you what other actuators, what are the things that you're working on to talk about, will be easy to implement in terms of doing work in a home or doing physical labor? The dishwasher is a great robot.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are still out of reach.
Okay. That's the hardest part, I think, is the actuators that you use to. I think a great robot, thermostats are great. And they can also be really, I think a lot of thermostats are shaped not very well. I think the system, there's a lot of systems that have been in place for 50, 60, 70 years. Traffic control systems are really antiquated. I think thermostats
Yeah, I think it's kind of a convergence of, it's kind of a movement towards smart homes, the Internet of Things, essentially. So everything that you have in your home will be connected to the Internet. And that's kind of converging with cheaper robots that are more capable. And so, you know, maybe in a few years you're going to see robots that can interface with your other appliances. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that area.
Can you put ROS on a smartphone?
I think so. I think someone built I think someone put a version on Raspberry Pi. But I mean, the cool thing about ROS is you don't have to put the ROS core, the operating system, on all these different components. You can just have a node and it just communicates through simple TC connecting. So that's the cool thing about ROS. It's very modular. I think my time's up. I'll chat to you guys after.
Okay, so the DC Community Access Network is something that we've been working on in the Broadband Bridge, or trying to figure out how to wrap our heads around for a couple of years. It is a property of the District of Columbia government, and they started building it in 2001 after September 11th with Homeland Security funding. Originally it's called DCNet. It is the internet backbone of the public services in DC. They also lease it to the federal government. In 2010, we sat down with the CTO, Brian Sivak, and he said, we'll open up a test node and you can build this into community wireless networks like the one that we heard about from Ann. Our idea was that we would use this to bridge the digital divide. That didn't happen. They fired him instead during the election. There was a whole regime change, and they basically said, no, we're not going to open up DCNet to the public because it's a secure network. So we ended up building our own networks and also organizing Discovery Technology Fairs and doing some community organizing. In the meantime, DC received millions and millions of dollars from the federal government through the stimulus package to build ultimately another network on top of DCNet that was for the community. So the DC Community Access Network was supposed to leverage this resource that DC has for the public benefit. It is the fastest municipally owned fiber optic network in the world, and it runs under all the main streets of DC. But it is a middle mile network, which means that it only goes to large institutions. They deliberately built it so that it would provide service to internet service providers or large community anchor institutions. They pledged to connect it to 250 community anchor institutions like health clinics, housing complexes, and so on. And so the Broadband Bridge, still reeling from their first broken promise, said, oh great, if hundreds of community anchor institutions connect, we can convince them to become hubs of powerful community wireless networks. We can open up DC CAN to the community that way. So Bread for the City there is actually just a photo of us putting a router on top of Bread for the City. That router's still there, but it's not connected. There are two problems with our plan. One, very few organizations actually ended up connecting. Bread for the City did because it's just that big. But most organizations can't actually afford how much it costs at the bottom. So we tried to pull organizations together, have them share a single account, but then we hit problem number 2, which is that Octo said that you can't actually share DC CAN. They changed their mind once we were actually about to open it up to the community and get multiple organizations together. This was their reason. What would the terrorist community think, and how would the corporations feel? This is why they changed their position and said you can't share this with the community. Those are actual quotes, yes. So this is a scandal, right? Like it's actually like they've wasted $30 million that was intended to bridge the digital divide. They're sitting on this infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. But we've tried to hit the quick fix. We tried to get the media to pay attention, and it's just too heavy an issue. It's a long-term struggle. But in the meantime, we could actually get into DC CAN by forming our own internet service provider. Community-owned broadband is actually something that's happening all across the country, but mostly in rural areas. In DC, there isn't the need that you have in rural areas. Many people need the internet, but there is internet available. But the biggest barrier for community broadband is actually getting fiber on the ground, and in our case, it's already there. So we could potentially form a cooperative internet service provider, play by their own rules, connect to the network, start purchasing it. There is precedent here in DC. This is DC Access. It's literally a mom and pop shop. They serve about 500 residents in Capitol Hill. We could form essentially a different version of DC Access as an internet, as a cooperative owned by its members. Now, this is not actually what I signed up to do. I like playing with people in technology. We all sort of work community organizing rather than building a business, and this is a little bit outside of our field of our acumen. But it's still really exciting, especially if you think about the possibilities for an initiative like this to partner with organizations like HacDC, educators, and technology refurbishers. If an initiative like this were undertaken as a community organizing effort to connect other kinds of technology that people need to bridge the digital divide, we can actually build a very strong digital ecosystem using this public infrastructure. So there's actually an Octo event on Monday where you can actually go and ask them some questions directly about what they have or have not done with this network. It's at the Goethe Institute as part of DC Week. They didn't advertise it very much because we showed up in their last one and didn't make things very happy for them. So that was a lot of acronyms. Sorry about all the information packed in, but there you go.